Castlevania Portrait of Ruin, released in 2006 for Nintendo DS and the second game in the series to grace the handheld, is another Igavania because of course it is. And once again, much like Dawn of Sorrow, we're sticking with the anime look for the character portraits and such, which I actually don't mind, if only because it gave us Charlotte's boo-boo face. Well, okay, that too, but I mean the other Charlotte. This humors me for some reason. Right, so now that we've got the silly stuff out of the way, let's dive into the meat of the matter. Castlevania Portrait of Ruin takes place during World War II, which should make for an interesting story or at least some great set pieces to battle in, but no, we're back at the castle because some vampire named Brahmer is trying to take over Dracula's old stomping grounds, and thus our heroes for the day are stock hero fellow Jonathan Morris and spellcasting witch Charlotte Alun, who is most definitely not a child.
Hey there! The young couple! So naive! She's like my kid's sister!
Jonathan!
Stop treating me like a child! Once this business is over, I will also settle down his features and how he is a heavyweight.
Also, for those up on their Castlevania lore, old Jonathan here is the son of John Morris, one of the heroes of Castlevania Bloodlines, for which Portrait of Ruin is a sort of pseudo-sequel to. Apparently, when Jonathan was a young boy, the old man croaked, and so the kid grew up with some daddy issues. There's also a guy named Wind who is a little more than he lets on, and that's as far as I'll go without spoiling into anything, at least thus far. And apparently there are no Belmonts around because we can't touch the whip until 1999 because stuff, I guess. They never really explained it all that well. Still, I suppose it's nice that they're building towards that final Demon Castle battle thing in 1999 that is supposed to result in the permanent destruction of Count Dracula and thus ensure that he will never, ever return to the world ever again in the new century to threaten anybody. No siree, Dracula's not coming back after 1999. He is dead. He will never return. Oh. Well, so much for that idea. Oops. So this is the usual Igavania fare. You roam around a castle, fighting monsters, gaining experience, relics, equipment, and other wares and things of that nature. There's a holy man who will sell you stuff because he's a holy man and he needs money. There's a ghost man who will offer challenges and reward you with rare items. There's an obscene amount of grinding to be done if you are going to acquire some bits of equipment and such. Nothing out of the ordinary. Except that Portrait of Ruin introduces a team-up mechanic where you control both Jonathan and Charlotte through this new iteration of the famed Demon Castle. Building on what was established in the Julius mode of Dawn of Sorrow, this comprises a tag team mechanic where you can switch between the two characters on the fly, summon your partner to help you out during certain situations, and even combine your powers for item crash-like effects. Some of these require relics for you to collect, but don't worry, you'll happen upon them soon enough and your team will be a menace or something. In any event, Jonathan is the stock Igavania hero. He can use whips and other weapons, but most importantly, he can use whips and he can eventually learn to strike downwards, so we're getting somewhere at least on that front. He can also collect all sorts of sub-weapons that can eventually be mastered and thus upgraded through subsequent uses. In other words, the fellow more suited for combat. On the flip side of things, Charlotte uses magical books as her melee weapons of choice, but her strength lies in her spell casting, and in order to perform spells, you need to hold up and Y to charge your spell. The longer the charge, the more effective the spell, but if you take a hit while charging, the process is cancelled and you'll need to start again. This makes Charlotte a slightly more challenging character to use, but at some point she becomes quite an effective force, and also, she has spells that can prove useful in the whole exploratory aspect, like turning into frogs and owls and shit. There's also one particular spell, Sanctuary, that's required to unlock further game and eventually get the true ending and such. You know, the usual Igavania barrier stuff. But it's the team-up aspect that makes Portrait of Ruin a somewhat unique experience compared to previous entries. Yes, there have been games where you could swap characters, Castlevania 3, the aforementioned Julius mode, and Dawn of Sorrow for example, But being able to summon a partner to help you out in combat situations is a pretty neat thing to have, and if they take any hits, you lose MP rather than HP, which is fine if you have no intent on using sub-weapon spells or other such things that require magic power. Sometimes, however, you'll need to summon your partner to help out in other exploratory things, whether it's hopping on their head to reach higher ground that won't hurt at all, or trying to push heavy objects to move them out of the way, or stopping a runaway train dead in its track underground. And this is why Superman is out of a job, because if these two young schmucks can stop a train with their bare hands, anyone can. Even you. Why not give it a try today? You'll be glad you did. The other neat thing about Portrait of Ruin, and the one thing that got me genuinely excited at the time, was that exploration was no longer restricted to just the castle, though don't get me wrong, most of the game still takes place within the castle. But scattered throughout its hollowed halls are paintings that can be entered, upon which you'll explore a unique world separate from the main castle setting. This includes a haunted town, an Egyptian pyramid, a circus setting with warped perspectives, and a mansion of sorts. Granted, you're still mostly exploring interior settings, and these maps are comparatively smaller than the main castle map, but hey, being able to go beyond the castle was considered to be a revolutionary step in Igavania fare, and it's nice to be able to visit something that isn't a variation of something I've played countless times before, again. So I would take this small step and give Portrait its flowers. Actually give Portrait a bunch of flowers. There's some compelling stuff here, especially in the backstory. Once you start learning the truth about the Senior Morris's passing, as well as the true nature of Brahmer, Wind, and the vampire ladies. Maybe it's due to some connection to a prior Vania game that I'm familiar with and actually quite liked, but I was more into the narrative in this game than in the previous games, which are usually paper-thin deals involving rivals, failed rituals, and missing body parts. I like that you could stockpile on sub-weapons and equip them as needed rather than whipping candles and other such things to have them pop out from there. Of course, it minimizes the candles and other such things to farming for mana refilling hearts or slow grind of currency, but I think we're past the point where I have to find a certain spot to get across to replace my axe. Sub-weapon inventory was a thing back in Simon's Quest on the NES, and there was no reason for it to not be a thing until the Sorrow games. So for this, I'm thankful. So naturally, as is the case with all these Igavanias, Portrait of Ruin features alternate play modes that can be unlocked upon completing certain conditions. Beat the game and you unlock Sisters mode. Defeat the Whip's memory and you unlock Richter mode. Defeat 1,000 old axe armors and you can play one yourself. And then regret your many life choices that led you to this moment. Richter mode is the obligatory non-canon mode where you play as Richter Belmont and young Maria Renard ripped straight from Rondo of Blood, although Richter does have his Symphony moveset so he can better navigate the castle. Actually, he can navigate the castle quite fine, and Maria is just there to provide a partner for partner stuff that's nowhere near as diverse as the Jonathan Charlotte stuff. Like in other alternate modes, you have no status screen or inventory, but the game does have a limited level up system that builds up your HP, and there's also HP max jars that you could pick up where they're usually found in the main game. I do wish you had a similar mode with John and Eric of Bloodlines fame, since this is supposed to be a sequel to that game, but I guess you gotta go with the more convenient option, which is sticking in the material that you already have ripped from prior games. Sister mode is the more interesting mode narratively speaking because it's essentially a prequel to the main story. But also it's the only mode that makes extensive use of the stylus as a play mechanic, which is a pain in the ass to play in Dominus on screen, but fortunately Switch version does feature touch controls, which means you can replicate the magic on there, but I also have the DS original so I could better show this off in context. Basically, both sisters can fly around, but flying uses up magic power. Stella can strike foes with a swipe of its stylus, while Loretta can fire ice beams that you aim with your pointer. Like in Richter mode, you have a bare-bones level-up system, no inventory or status screen to keep track of things. And while the stylus-dominant controls may be a turn-off for some, I didn't quite mind this. It's not something I'm going to rush back to anytime soon, but I prefer stylus controls being executed in this fashion over Dawn of Sorrow's deal with the seals and all that nonsense. And besides, it's a separate deal, you don't really have to play it, it's just there for those who want it. And speaking of things that are just there for those who want it, there's the old Axe Armor mode, where you play as an Axe Armor, solo character, and I honestly don't get the point of this. I get this is supposed to be like a joke mode or something. It's a callback to something they did back in Symphony, but still, why? Why? I mean, so many more enticing options you could have done to put in this game, and you could go with the one note. Look, we all have things that tickle our fancy, and apparently this tickled his fancy once upon a time, and now I'm glad he's not doing Castlevania anymore, because he could do this in Bloodstained as many times as he wants. I really don't care anymore, but... it's one of those things that I'm never going to get, and I'm fine with that. Because, yeah. Yeah, we might as well dive into the graphical aspect of Portrait of Ruin, which maintains the overall visual quality of the previous game. You've got some nicely drawn, smoothly animated sprite work on the part of the heroes, some detailed scenery that strikes a nice balance between lavishly moody set pieces, and some nice outdoor backgrounds, some truly fiendish creature designs, this one polygonal peeping eye enemy that certainly stands out if nothing else, and of course lots of recycled sprite work from previous games because fuck me, this man has no shame. Some would argue all these recycled bits are callbacks to series past, after all this game being released on the year of Castlevania's 20th anniversary. Well, that's a convenient excuse now, isn't it? But hey, for what it's worth, the old shit doesn't clash with the new shit, and honestly, I think that's more of a credit to the original artists who crafted these sprites in the first place, that they still hold up years later and look fairly good in these new settings. So really, we can all joke and poke fun at this practice, but if it fits, so why not? It's not a case of ill-fitting old shit slapped onto the new shit like some crappy fan game thing or something. Likewise, the audio portion of the program is pretty consistent quality-wise with what came before. Well, not quite. Portrait of Ruin does have some of the better music tracks in the trilogy, and I'm not just saying that because you have some remixed tunes of some classic Vania tunes in there that aren't too shabby, though not particularly my favorite versions of said tunes. Some of the original tracks are pretty damn good too. Invitation of a Crazed Moon, Jail of Jewel, Gears Go Awry, Chaotic Playground, all great little pieces. Sound effects are the usual crisp, crunchy quality sounds, and there's some limited vocal bits here and there whenever Charlotte does a spell or limited bits of dialogue, and of course you know.
Charlotte! Jonathan! Charlotte! Jonathan! Charlotte! Jonathan! Charlotte! Jonathan! Charlotte! Jonathan! Charlotte! Jonathan! Jonathan!
Though if you grow tired of that, you could actually turn that off, at least in the Dominus version. I'm not sure about the original DS release, it's been a while, but yeah, anyways. Overall, would I call Castlevania Portrait of Ruin the best in the DS trilogy? My answer would have to be yes, but only by default. There are some issues that weighed the game down a bit. Its over-reliance on recycled assets both in terms of enemy sprites as well as stages, as you're tasked with remixed maps of the previous 4 areas later in the game. Early releases of the game would also glitch out, although I somehow never ran into these issues myself, either in the Dominus release or in my copy of the game. On the other hand though, Portrait of Ruin doesn't have the magic seal bullshit of Dawn of Sorrow, nor does it possess the stamina-draining glitz, the mundane characters and narrative, or the frankly utter worthlessness of Order of Ecclesia. Hell, I could just say that Portrait of Ruin is not Order of Ecclesia, and that's already a huge win in my book. But honestly, I think Portrait of Ruin is just a better game overall. The team dynamic adds a bit of flavor to the gameplay, there are some fun environments to explore, I actually enjoy some of the narrative bits, and if nothing else, it's probably the most Castlevania of the bunch. It's a natural follow-up to a prior entry in the series, the main character uses the trademark whip, the Count is more old school in his design and not just the stock old man design they stick with for the rest of the series, even though Dracula could theoretically change shape and not just stick with the same look over and over, but whatever. It's a game that isn't afraid of embracing its early days while also maintaining the standard consistent with its then current setup. And maybe that's why Portrait appeals to me. Despite some shortcomings and limitations, it truly feels like a best of both worlds type of deal, and thus a worthy celebration of 20 years of vampire-killing shenanigans in the Demon Castle. All the Sorrow games, Ecclesia, and yes, even your beloved Symphony of the Night, with a few tweaks, name changes and such, these games could have been their own things without any ties to Castlevania lore, and it wouldn't make much of a difference gameplay-wise. Though in the case of one game in particular, it probably would have been better off doing its own thing.